Cliven Bundy has been wrestling with the Federal Bureau of Land Management for decades. On the federal side, the government is charging that Bundy owes more than $1 million for illegal use of land, where he set his herd of cattle to graze. On Bundy's part, he says, quote, "I have no contract with the United States government. I was paying grazing fees for management, and that's what BML was supposed to be, land managers, and they were managing my ranch out of business, so I refused to pay," end quote. Part of that refusal has led to a band of heavily armed militia staking out the territory and actually backing down the BLM. The cattle has returned, but is the fight over? And is this an effort? And is this effort an isolated incident or the beginning of a chain of dominoes? To look under America's armor at the goings-on in Bunkerville, Nevada, I'm being joined by USC Professor of Law, Jody Armour. Welcome, Jody.
Good to be back with you, Andrew.
Now, is this the case of a tenant who refuses to pay his landlord and is then claiming squatting rights?
Well, it's a tricky little legal question that he's raising. It seems absurd to many of us, but he says he sincerely and honestly holds this belief that there are limits in what obligations he owes the federal government. And as unreasonable as his beliefs may seem to many of us, if not most of us, the Supreme Court in a case called Cheek versus United States held that certain kinds of mistakes, as long as they're honestly held about the legality of what one is doing, can excuse you, can be exculpatory, may negate any consciousness of wrongdoing on the part of the wrongdoer. So I am not even so incensed or outraged as some are at Bundy making these claims. He may sincerely believe in what he's saying. I guess my concern more, Andrew, goes to the people who are mainstream politicians and mainstream news outlets that are standing behind him and throwing gas on these kind of incendiary arguments that he's making. He may sincerely and honestly hold these beliefs, but surely these people don't. These more sober and measured people don't. And so that makes me start wondering if, say, Fox News Channel and some of the Republican supporters and other party supporters that are more mainstream that have gotten behind him, that maybe they are promoting some other agenda. You know, they don't really believe that he has some kind of legitimate moral claim here, but maybe this is part of a kind of public lands under attack by the extraction industries kind of case. You know, we're talking about oil, gas, ranching, Exxon Mobil and their corporate interests, corporate powers, in other words, that want to privatize or property generally, you know, the public lands generally, or push property down to the state and local level. And so that's all I can figure. So I'm not so, I guess, perturbed or, you know, upset by someone like Mr. Bundy saying what he says. You know, that's he has a right to hold certain beliefs sincerely and to challenge them in certain ways. We can talk about whether this is an appropriate way with guns rather than other kinds of civil disobedience that others have practiced. We can talk about that too. But I'm really astonished by the support that he's getting from much more mainstream and responsible kinds of places.
A lot of meat to go into right there. Want to start with the idea of ignorance of the law is possibly an excuse, or if you're ignorant and sincerely have a set of beliefs. I find that one really tough to swallow, because what I've read is that Bundy's father was paying these fees, and for a time Bundy himself was paying these fees until he decided, I've had enough, or the government's not doing what I want them to do, so I'm just not going to pay. Does the tenant of a renter have that right? Can they just decide, well, you know, I've paid enough, so now it's mine?
Well, let me put it this way. This case famous case, Cheek United States, a 1991 Supreme Court case. In that case, the defendant was convicted of willfully failing to file federal income tax returns, right? That's pretty basic. And his defense was he sincerely believed that under the tax laws, he owed no taxes, including even on his wages, and that if he did owe any taxes under these laws, the laws were unconstitutional. Well, the court held that an honest but good faith belief that he didn't hold the taxes under the statute, because the statute required willfulness, would be a good defense, a complete defense. So it is, as strange as it may seem, unreasonable beliefs that are patently unreasonable to the rest of us may be excused if the statute is interpreted as requiring knowledge by the actor that he is doing wrong, not just that he be unreasonable, but that he honestly and sincerely knows that he's being unreasonable, knows that he's violating the law, is acting in kind of some almost premeditated way, but certainly intentional way. And so, yeah, there is that precedent in the law, Andrew, that has been carved out by the Supreme Court in that 1991 Cheek case. They didn't go, that's why I don't focus so much attention on Bundy himself as on his supporters in the mainstream who really do know better.
And I guess maybe that's why Bundy comes out with statements like, quote, "I don't even recognize the United States government as even existing," end quote.
Yes. Now, this gets at a deep issue, Andrew, and why I can't just write off Bundy as a quack that we need to just marginalize and not think seriously about, because he's getting at something that has been a perennial issue in the U.S., and sometimes groups that we more sympathize with, like the abolitionists or women's rights movements, civil rights movements, who have taken an adversarial posture in relationship to the government. We've been more sympathetic to their causes and their fights. Malcolm X said the ballot or the bullet, for example, and he was very sincere when he said that, and he had a lot of support in saying it. So what these cases really get at is the moral force of the law and how fragile that moral force is, how important it is that the law have moral force, that it have a legitimacy in its authority, because when the law loses its legitimacy in the eyes of a significant percentage of the American population, bad things happen. The 1992 riots here in LA happened because the law lost its legitimacy in the eyes of many people in the community here. They waited for justice. They waited for that verdict. They didn't go to the streets when the beating of Rodney King first saturated the airwaves. They waited for the verdict, and when the Simi Valley verdict returned a not guilty verdict against 4 officers who were seen on camera beating a black motorist, Rodney King, then the violence exploded and LA went up in flames for 3 days. So that's the tangible price that we pay when the government loses its legitimacy and our laws lose their legitimacy. And this Bundy case is making us focus on that again and making us remember that the government has an interest in remaining legitimate, maintaining its moral force, which means it can't dilute that moral force, Andrew, I think. It makes it more important for the government to see that, things that the NSA may be doing, that Snowden revealed, that anything that undermines confidence in the government really encourages more of this kind of Cliven, Bundy, people thumbing their nose at authority. And it's important that if you want to stamp that out, you maintain your legitimacy by not overreaching when you can avoid overreaching.